Welcome to View from Left Field, where we analyze and discuss weekly news. I'm your host, Will, and today we will be talking about the Democrats recommending that they embrace autocracy ahead of November. We'll be talking about the ILA Port Strike, as well as an article from the New York Times suggesting that we escalate in Iran. And today on our panel, we have SM Safone.
How you doing, everybody?
Jimmy.
Hey, everyone.
And last but not least, Jerry.
Jerry, that's me. And did you introduce yourself, Will?
I
also
certainly
Will.
did.
Oh, okay. Just making sure.
All right, so let's get into it. We'll go to the first article for today. So the top of the article, so this was written on September 28th. So about a week ago, but still relevant. So it starts off and says, Carville suggests Democrats should embrace, quote, autocracy ahead of November. And it starts off, veteran political strategist James Carville suggested that Democrats should embrace autocracy ahead of the November election, arguing not everyone should have, quote, a seat at the table. I would always tell people in campaigns, if you want a democracy after the election, you have to have an autocracy before the election, Carville said during his Friday appearance on Politico's Playbook Deep Dive podcast.
Is this a good time to introduce really who James Carville is or was? I think he got popular all the way back with Bill Clinton getting elected in 1992, where he made where Bill Clinton, I think, had a plurality of the vote, like 42%, because I think it was Ross Perot who also ran. And his strategy, yes, was once again pushing for this more centrist or conservative view, I guess, for the Democratic Party, kind of like this beginning of the third way politics, or pushing into the neoliberalism and whatnot, which did it help Bill Clinton win? I mean, Ross Perot was running as well, and so it makes you wonder. He's always been a kind of a part of the Democratic machine since then, and we saw how successful that plan was in 2016 against Trump when Hillary Clinton ran. But
yeah, and it even mentions here a couple paragraphs down, it says Carville, who served as an advisor for former President Clinton, stated that the, quote, shortcomings of Democratic campaigns sometimes comes from having too many voices and perspectives influencing the outcome. I really feel like he's saying the quiet part out loud there. I mean,
like how,
yeah, it's like, and like you said, and especially I think all of us can agree, we have definitely seen like the Democratic Party shifting right. I mean, it's, if you look over decades and decades, I mean, we've certainly seen that from that party, and we've seen kind of the tactics that they've used to make sure that they, come out on top or that they win. And this is just them kind of coming out and saying it, and they always have this excuse, and they always have for the last 8 years. I mean, they've used it more than just that, but they always say that this is the most important election. If we don't win, look at what's going to happen. And they always give these kind of doomsday scenarios. They always make it seem like that we're one election away from not having elections anymore. And they try to pass it off as, oh, we're doing this to protect you, or, oh, we're doing this because, we want whatever. They're trying to make themselves look altruistic, but it's
the cynicism, but it's also saying that, oh, we should try to be, or we should become more autocratic. But aren't they pretty autocratic already? Like, just look at what they did to Bernie Sanders, and kind of ousting him from the Democratic Party. I mean, yeah, they are just saying the quiet part out loud here. This is their strategy for the last 30 years. This is nothing new to them. It's just kind of, why is he mentioning it so blatantly now? And that just might be part of their strategy now is, let's just, I would say, alienate the more left-leaning voters who haven't voted. Let's go for a more centrist, because that's their strategy. It seems like the whole Harris campaign is, it's like, let's focus on these undecided centrist kind of leaning voters who haven't decided if they're going to vote for Trump or Harris yet. We kind of saw how that worked in 2016, at least.
Well, that's been the Democratic Party strategy since Carville ran Clinton's campaign in '92. Can't
Exactly.
forget that. But you bring up what they did to Bernie. What about how they made Kamala the nominee this year? That was very autocratic.
Yep.
And
Yep.
they see there's the threat that they had from the DSA types, the so-called left within the Democratic Party. Yeah, that threat's not really there for them anymore. And you see how far right the Republicans are going. So they have no reason to embrace anything but going further right at this point.
Right. We see one of the biggest one of the biggest speakers for the Harris campaign is Bernie Sanders. And that was the case after he lost the primary in 2020 and in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. He's always the one. Yes.
Can't forget Liz Cheney as well.
Yeah. Great Democratic president supporter Liz Cheney, daughter to the war criminal, Dick Cheney. But that's all.
Yeah, and just to finish off this article, it actually was a little shorter. I expected there to be more, but the last couple paragraphs of it, they say the comments came just days after he said he has a, quote, feeling that Vice President Harris could win the election, now less than 6 weeks away. I don't like to predict elections. I would just say this just doesn't feel like a race that Harris is going to lose, Carville said earlier this week on CNN, adding, but that's just a feeling. That's just a feeling.
It's so what's the point of saying this whole
that
thing?
Seems ominous.
To me, it reminds me, I know this is overused, but it does kind of remind me of a Trump rally speech, almost like, just a feeling. I'm just putting it out there. It's just such a craven, like, cynical strategy is really.
Yeah. Well, and even, back to the point of autocracy being part of the Democratic strategy. I mean, we could go all the way back to 1948 with what they did to Henry Wallace back then. I mean, they clearly rigged their own primary against Henry Wallace to oust him from the party.
Yep.
So it's nothing new to the Democrats.
Just a quick correction. What they did to Henry Wallace was 1944.
Oh, sorry.
When they removed him as vice president.
It was 40. It's 48 when he ran for the I forget his third party he ran for.
Progressive Party.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Wallace, and then Truman ran in 48, won. But also, how many months before FDR died did they replace Wallace with Truman?
That happened at the convention the year before.
A year before.
It happened at the convention itself.
At the convention, yes. Yeah, I just find that it's never been that way. You kind of could see that even with LBJ, they kind of saw something happening to him, and I guess RFK ran in that place. I don't know. I mean, this is the oldest political party apparently in the world, the Democratic Party. When have they been democratic in this sense? This is just how parties run too, but I never find anything that the Democratic Party does is very arguably democratic.
Well, it is democratic, just not for the workers or anybody else, just democratic for the capitalists at the top of the party.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, I mean, and we see how much they try to also influence things that aren't even happening outside of their own party. I mean, how many times have we heard that they try to sue the Green Party in however many states to keep them off the ballot? And they're coming out and they're saying, well, we need to be more autocratic. It I just I always wonder, like, why. I guess I always wonder why, but we all know what the reason is why they're always doing this. It's just, it always seems like every day that passes by, it feels like they get slightly more insane.
You know
Speaking of
what's
the,
interesting about it? How the more I see it as I get older, how it feels like it's almost like a fire and brimstone form of politics,
Mm-hmm.
which has kind of always been there in America, where it's like the Republican Party is the wrathful and vengeful God, while the Democratic Party is the path to salvation.
Right.
The way that it is presented is really interesting to me in that way, where it's almost like it's kind of just part of our culture that they can get away with it this way because it's kind of almost like as Americans our like puritanical perception of reality. I don't know. That's been my running theory that I've never really explored, but
It's frustrating because it's always a popularity contest and it's hard to argue with, I would say, relatives and friends that don't, I guess, like the divisiveness of politics, as if politics were not supposed to be about arguing and fighting for power. But it's like, who is it? Like, who? What are the politics like? Who is it divisive towards? And it's like, oh, we want people to be more kind when we see them on TV, and this is just all a show. And so it's kind of frustrating to bring it up to people when they see articles like this, and they might agree with it, like, oh, we just need to win finally, we just need to beat Trump. But Trump's not going away, MAGA is not going away if Trump loses. Like, that's what I think people need to be aware of. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
this is not a winning strategy for what they want. And I hope we could find a way to tell people this, that are, you know, just not wanting to see disgusting people on TV, I guess, is what they don't like.
well,
What I
it is a winning strategy for them because all they care about is keeping the capitalists in power.
Right.
And so no matter what, and Trump may be gone if he loses. And like you said, MAGA will still be there, but it won't be MAGA. It'll be the worst aspects from the MAGA movement. Because, Trump himself may not be an outright fascist, but it's the fascists, a lot of all the fascists are backing Trump. And that's what's coming behind Trump if he doesn't make it.
Right.
We can't forget that. But we talk about the Democratic Party attack on democracy. It is very, 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 it's not random. It's on purpose. They still blame Ralph Nader for Bush winning. They blame Jill Stein for Trump winning in 2016. That's why they attack the Green Party the way they do. And, for all they say about January 6th acting like it's unique in American history, we can't forget that the recount in Florida in 2000 was stopped because of a similar riot to prevent
Right.
them doing the recount. It was given the name Brooks Brothers riot because they were all there in Brooks Brothers suits.
Roger Stone helped instigate that.
Yes, and in many ways that was worse than January 6th because it succeeded.
It did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're correct. He wanted to cause chaos, and it worked. And so I just find that confusing, their whole strategy. But that's kind of, I kind of lost my train of thought here.
well, did anybody see Jill Stein talking about January Sixers? That she basically acknowledged that it was kind of overblown for the purpose of like political assassination. That's not a quote,
Yeah.
that's my paraphrasing of it. So
I
that's a
mean,
thing.
those of us on the left, I understand being against the ideology behind the people on January 6th. But the actions, it made the ruling class scared. And they should be scared of the workers and the working class and the left. Now they're just scared of the fascists and the more right-wing elements. And you see the way they essentially just thrown so-called left behind them, and they're going further right. They're not scared of us at all because we have no power.
So next, let's go to our article from the New York Times by none other than Brett Stevens. So on this article, he
Brett Stevens,
opens it
right?
up with
This is the
yeah,
guy that in what was it, in 2003, he wrote an article saying that we need to go into Iraq, right? This is the great opinion editorial of the New York Times. Just want to give some background. It's my understanding. But go ahead.
right. Yeah. So he opens up this article and it says, "We absolutely need to escalate in Iran." And this is from October 1st.
Absolutely. Oh, boy.
Absolutely. So then he starts off and it says, long before he met with his overdue demise last week, Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, offered a theological explanation for why Israel had come into existence. He says, the Jews will gather from all parts of the world into occupied Palestine, he said in his 2002 speech, of which there is an audio recording. Not in order to bring about the Antichrist and the end of the world, but rather that Allah, the glorified and most high, wants to save you from having to go to the ends of the world, for they have gathered in one place. They have gathered in one place, and there the final and decisive battle will take place. In other words, Israel was one-stop shopping for killing all Jews. That is a weird sentence.
It's a weird way to start an opinion. I mean, it's obviously set to spark emotions here.
Of course.
Is it?
But I'm going to skip down just a little bit. So then he says, this year, Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned that Iran was within a week or two of being able to produce enough weapons-grade uranium for a nuclear bomb. Even with the requisite fissile material, it takes time and expertise to fashion a nuclear weapon, particularly one small enough to be delivered by a missile. But a prime goal for Iran's nuclear ambitions is plainly in sight, especially if it receives technical help from its new best friends in Russia, China, and North Korea. There we go.
All
the boogeymen
together.
They're all, yep.
So in that article that you mentioned that he wrote in 2003, was there just as much like fear mongering of
Weapons of mass
nuclear
destruction?
weapons and like axis of evil as is in this one?
I would have to reread this article.
That's all
But
he writes.
Yeah.
but remember the weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein just had in his closet that we were going to find in Iraq that never were found. Also, just a reminder, 32 years ago, I believe it was, Israel assassinated one of the co-founders of Hezbollah, saying that this is the end of Hezbollah. This is the end of the era of Hezbollah. After they did that, that's what I believe the prime minister said. I can't remember who that was at the time. But obviously that wasn't the case. And it's not the case even in the American aspect of this war on terrorism. And this is a very convenient boogeyman, as we've been saying, that continues to be pushed so that we could continue some war in the Middle East. And if it's America or Israel or the allies of America and NATO, this seems to be a very common I would say, not just from Stevens, but I would just say from the ruling class in the media that it feeds.
Not for nothing. I'm 41 years old. My whole adult life, Iran has been 1 or 2 weeks away from getting a nuclear weapon.
Right. Uh, and I gotta read this part of this article right here because it kind of like drops the curtain for why he's writing this whole thing. It says it would be a mistake to give the same advice now. Up above, I think he's talking about basically kind of working to maybe make relations with Iran. But he says Iran presents an utterly intolerable threat not only to Israel but also to the United States and whatever remains of the liberal international order we're supposed to lead.
Yeah.
Like that sentence right there.
International order we're supposed to lead. Yeah. This doesn't, God, this is such a frustrating article. And articles like this are so frustrating, especially coming from a Jewish background. I don't think this helps the safety of, as he's trying to argue in the beginning paragraphs, the safety of the Jews. This, to some extent, could even inspire some anti-Semitic rhetoric, and it's just not helpful at all. People in Israel, I support an Israel state. I support a Palestinian state, but I don't think a military strategy is a winning strategy for that. It has to be a political strategy. We see that what Netanyahu regime is doing is exactly what Hezbollah or Hamas is trying to do, which is to fuel a war. And this is basically driven disproportionately by the Netanyahu regime. And you're feeding into that mindset, whether it's on one side of the extremists or the other side. It's very frustrating when I see articles like this. And this is just, it's nothing new. And that's what bothers me, is it's like everyone has amnesia. As CM Safone just mentioned, Iran is always about to get a nuclear weapon. So
oh yeah, no, what I was gonna say is, there's always this line, especially with articles like this, where he says that, oh, we need to protect the liberal international order, and so there's always this idea, and we see this with like a lot of countries where, and I guess I didn't see it expressly said in this article, but I've seen it in like a lot of articles before about Iran where, people will point out certain aspects of things about Iran, like, oh, they maybe don't treat certain groups of people may not have the same freedoms that we have over here. But they always use this in context to say, well, we should go overthrow their country. We need to bring them freedom. It's always that type, like with Russia, we've seen that too, where liberals will say, oh, well, Russia is, anti-LGBT type of thing. And they say, well, this is pretext. We have to overthrow Putin and we need to get into Russia and, reform their country. But I mean, it's always it is always meant as a backdrop of, well, it's conveniently that they're always sitting on some kind of like natural resource that we want, right? I mean, we heard that thing with Venezuela, we heard it with Bolivia, these countries are sitting on oil reserves or lithium reserves. So it's always, oh, well, we need to get in there and we need to get rid of their government. I see a lot of the same thing with Iran, because of course we all know it's not perfect, and none of these countries are. None of them are perfect. But it always seems like these are given pretext for us to go in there and wage some kind of overthrow of their government. And I see kind of the same thing with this here. It's always, oh, so and so's got to go because they're a threat to the United States. Well, how are they a threat? How are they a threat to the United States? But it always comes back to some kind of imperialist, uh,
It's
goal
these
that the U.S.
right.
has.
But it's these imperialists that are a threat to the United States. It's the people that are pushing these wars in the Middle East that are not just a threat to the United States, but a threat to Israel. And it's that's what gets me. And it's they don't know the history, or they purposefully obscure or don't teach the history. Like I said, this is nothing new. What they were saying about Hezbollah. This, and remember who helped fund Hamas was Netanyahu's Likud government.
Yeah.
That's convenient. And it's you can find all this information. I would love to go into it, and we can maybe have another podcast about that, because this is just, you get this in front of you, you don't actually get the history in front of you. And I find that that's why seeing stuff like this is very frustrating.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, moving on. SM, are you ready for your ILA strike section?
Yes. So
Perfect. Go for it. The floor is yours.
we've all seen what's gone on the ports in the last few weeks, the lead up to on the strike. I like to bring up that we should talk about. I like to talk about that a little bit tonight. I just want to give some notes on the strike. If we have time, we could get into the statement that the ILA put out with regards to the wage increases, but like we should get to in some important notes on the strike. First thing I want to mention, the whole strike was top down. No membership vote to authorize the strike was took place. It all came from the leadership. And even when I showed up on the picket line in Staten Island this week, there was some members that really didn't want to strike. And I definitely did not see a militancy, a lot of, of the more business unionists type claim that they saw when they were on lines. There wasn't a lot of militancy. There was like one or two people that were really holding up the strike with any type of energy at all. While recognizing the role the dock workers play in keeping the economy running, Harold Daggert, the ILA president, I mean, his rhetoric was more like a gangster than it was class conscious. A lot of people giving him some credit, and even I gave him a little bit of credit, a little bit. But looking back and thinking about it, he sounded more like a gangster than somebody that was class conscious. And I like to note in the interview that was on the ILA website leading up to the strike, he mentioned that labor and management should be working together, not going against each other. So we see the class collaboration mentality that right there. And of course, the key issues on the strike, the ILA wanted 77% wage increases over 6 years, no automation on the docks, and there was a jurisdictional battle, mainly with regards to container royalties. That was supposed to be royalty payouts that went to the workers, but the companies were getting a cut, so they wanted the whole container royalties to go back to the workers like they were supposed to. And of course, with the automation, and they caught some ports on the eastern Gulf coasts implementing automation against the contract before it expired. You see IT workers controlling automation as opposed to longshoremen. So that's a jurisdictional battle. And I want to notice, and it's important to how the strike played out. In a statement in July, Daggett said, quote, "We will not entertain any discussions about extending the current contract, nor are we interested in any help from outside agencies to interfere in our negotiations with USMX. This includes the Biden administration and the Department of Labor." End quote. It's very important, as we'll see as the strike went on. And of course, during the strike, they let all military cargo still go through, and they allow cruise ships to go through as well. And of course, as the strike deadline came, Biden announced he won't enact Taft-Hartley and force a 90-day cool-off period. And in that same interview I mentioned from right before the strike, Daggett had mentioned that if Taft-Hartley was enacted, they wouldn't be going back to work at full productivity. They'd be doing 8 moves an hour instead of their typical 30 moves an hour. And when I talked to workers on the strike, they said it would be less. They said it would be 5 moves an hour. And of course, the ILA tried to start negotiating a new contract 2 years ago. And the last contract offer they had received, up until right before they went on strike, was in February 2023. So the U.S. Maritime Alliance, which is the negotiating body for the port carriers, from February 23 till as the workers were about to go on strike, gave no offer to the workers. And of course, publicly, everybody heard, I'm sure, that it was just under 50% raises over 6 years that they offered at that time, since they were meant to go out. And then, of course, we saw the attacks on the strike.
It was supposed to increase consumer prices, is what I've heard.
Well, of course, the media attacks were the effect on the economy. Not just increasing consumer prices. It was nothing would be on the shelves, and we saw a lot of reports about no toilet paper being available, and a lot of people I saw said store employees were telling them, "Oh, we don't have the toilet paper because of the strike." Mind you, this was the night before they even walked out on strike.
COVID all over again with
Yeah,
no
not
toilet
again.
paper. Oh,
That's
then-
the conspiracy.
And then the other attacks were on Daggett's bourgeois lifestyle.
Oh,
And then there were the political attacks, conservatives and Republicans with their typical attacking the or any worker movement. But there were also Democratic Party operatives who attacked the strike. The one I saw most notably was former Obama staffer John Cooper. I remember him from running some state campaigns in 2008. And he claimed, and a lot of these claims from Democratic operatives, using a picture of Daggett with Trump and a statement the ILA put out offering, calling for members to give Trump their prayers after he was the supposed assassination attempt, which in my opinion, I think it was faked.
yeah. Note to the listener: there are union workers who vote for Trump. By the way, I don't want that to surprise people. That's all.
Oh, there were a lot, and there were Trump flags on the picket lines, some picket lines.
I bet.
But they because it happened in October right before the election, so it was purposely planned. These are 6-year contracts they work on, so it implied that when the contract was negotiated 6 years ago, they did it on they purposely negotiated it so that Trump would go out. It would help Trump then. How would they have known that Trump was running? They couldn't have. Then, of course, the ultra left attacked the strike as well. We could get into that a little bit later. I just want to finish going through the notes.
Oh,
Those are some of the most absurd attacks. And of course, who does it help? The bosses, the capitalists. Typical. And the strike lasted 3 days. Like I said, I went on the picket line in Staten Island. There wasn't a lot of political consciousness, especially regarding the military cargo shipments in Israel-Palestine. But after talking to some workers about it, they did come to the understanding that if they didn't continue the military shipments, Biden would have probably enacted Taft-Hartley.
yes. So that was a good strategy on their side, and
Yes and no. And we could get into that a little bit when we do our round robin here. And the strike deal, 61.5 raises over 6 years, 61.5% raises over 6 years. Now that's a little misleading because they're compounded rates. So it's not actually 61% in physical raises. It's because, you have your first year raise, then your second year raise is on that new wage, not the original raise. So it's not actually broken up 10.10 and I think it would have been 10.25% if it was actually 1.5% raises. It's actually a little less than that, but it is a compounded rate, which is, still good, but not as good as it sounds. And I noticed a lot of unions nowadays, when they say how much the raises are over the life of a contract, they use the compounded rate now because it always sounds better. No deal on automation of jurisdiction has happened thus far. They agreed to extend the current contract until January 2015. But wait, in July, they said they wouldn't entertain that in any way. And then, of course, throughout the strike, Daggett plays Julie Sue from the labor secretary on her help in trying to bring negotiations. Something else he said he didn't want it. A lot of contradictions there.
Hmm.
And of course, wage increases, while they did secure the deal, they will not take effect until there is a contract ratification. So they still didn't get those raises now, any of those raises now. It won't come into effect until they have a full contract. And of course, because it was a deal to return to work, instead of doing the slowdown, they're going back to work at full productivity. And then, of course, like going on strike, no membership vote was held to return to work.
Yeah, one thing I noticed too on the statement, I guess that was put out about the 61.5 is one of the caveats with that was there would be a no strike clause. From what it looked like, it said if we were to accept the wage increase now, we would have to sign a no strike clause.
Well, that's just until January 15th as part of the extending the contract. The contract
okay,
itself
so
has
it's
a no
not.
strike clause.
Wait, their contract already has a no strike clause?
Yeah. So they, by extending the contract to January 15th, they are working within the contract still. So they can't strike. They can't strike until January 15th.
Oh, okay. I thought that meant the way I read it is that they were saying, okay, the companies were saying, okay, we'll give you a 61.5 wage increase, but we also want to throw in a no strike clause moving forward. That was the way I read it, at least. Is that not the case then?
No, well, if you reread it again, that statement, and I'll read the whole section. If we were to accept the wage increase now, we would have to sign a no strike clause. This would give the employers the leverage to block us from addressing other crucial issues that impact every member's job security and future. By extending the contract until January 15th, we keep our ability to negotiate and fight for the other important matters that go beyond economics.
I see. Okay. I see now. Because yeah, I was thinking it was saying that in order to get the 61.5 wage increase, they were going to have to take on a no strike clause. I was like, that sounds that's crazy. And it's like, no way.
And you listen to the way that's worded. Other demands that go beyond economics. Let's be honest. All of the demands are economic demands. Every single one of them.
Right.
Jurisdiction and automation are economic demands.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where some of the criticism from the ultra left came. They criticize it for being a purely economic strike.
Good. It should be, right?
No. Well, because they're saying, and of course they will cite Lenin and how the Bolshevik Party made the strikes political, not just simply economic. But without without somebody to lead that, how is it going to happen? These are people outside the movement, labor movement, are really against labor. If you listen to the way they talk, they cite Jay Sakai and settlers, which is a complete farce. It's there to something that was created to break apart the working class movement.
Or Sakai, wasn't he the one that said that fascism comes from the working class or something like that?
He's the one that's saying, white workers aren't working class because they're white. And because
well, they're part of the labor aristocracy or whatever he says.
Well, I mean, labor aristocracy, yes. I mean, labor aristocracy is real. I would say Daggett himself is labor aristocracy. Sure. The workers aren't. Of course. The rank and file isn't. They lump everybody together as a labor aristocracy.
Yep.
And of
Yeah, and
course, you look at the way they talk, the media talked about, oh, these workers make $150,000 a year already. You know,
Work a lot.
with their wage increases that they're getting, they're it's still not $150,000 a year at the end of the contract in 6 years. These are people, the media publicly put out that these dock workers make 150 grand a year. And then when they settle on an agreement, they go, oh, their raises are going from $39 an hour to 63. $39 an hour ain't nowhere near $150,000 a year.
right. That's like closer to 80.
It is 80, a little
Yeah.
bit more than 80.
Yeah.
It's a joke.
Yeah.
It is, but are they working, or is it set to 8 hours for the dock workers, or is
Well,
it
that's your base pay. You work when you have work available to you. There is no set schedule for a dock worker.
Oh my goodness.
You're working when the ships come in. So
Okay.
there could be
Is it like an on-call job?
there is a lot of on-call, yes.
And which is very inconsistent. It's similar to
It's not consistent. You could have weeks where you're working 80 to 100 hours a week, and you could have weeks where you're not getting any work.
Right.
And of course, all their benefits are based off of how many hours they work.
Yep.
And so if you're not hitting all the hours you need in a year, you're not getting your benefits for that year.
That's what I find. This is a win. Any sort of negotiations like this, that I think it's a win for the working class.
The wages are a win.
The wage
increases are a win.
Right.
Of course.
But there's other issues involved here.
Of course, there always is going to be. And, like you were saying, yes, there was a bit of shady mobsterism, and I guess you could say this is the argument that I hear from people that are in management all the time is, well, who controls the labor unions? It's these mobsters, in all the sense that you can't work with them because they're so toxic. They're so they're so shady that having no union is better than a corrupt union. And it doesn't look, I wouldn't call it corrupt, right? You would just say that this just happens in capitalism.
Well, the ILA has its reputation. I'm just going to say that. We're not going to get into it.
Well,
that may be, ILA is one of those unions where that reputation is truer than people like to believe.
And of course they would push that at any.
Of course.
Right.
Like, this is the union that controls the docks in New York City and Jersey.
Well, and that's where we come to the whole contradiction with business unionism, and which a lot of the AFL unions in the United States operate by. A lot of them push that idea that labor and management can come to an agreement on things. This is things that I have seen told to me through various means, whether it's in the contract or whether it's, in a class or whatnot. It's always this idea of, well, we don't need to strike. We can come to an agreement with management. We don't need to have work stoppage type of thing. That's like a very common idea within a lot of the unions.
Especially the old AFL unions.
Right. Yep. And now, of course, the ILA they struck for 3 days, but like you said, Daggett still has that idea of they can come to an agreement, and that is the problem that we see with, I guess that's inherent with business unionism and where a lot of these problems come.
Of course. And
what do you
Daggett,
what do you think pushed this to the point where good old business unionism was not good enough and they ended up going on strike? What do you think?
Business unionism can only get you so far. At some point, you're going to hit a point where the management will no longer work with you. It is inevitable no matter what.
So they were at that point, and management, or you should say management, even with all these misconceptions of how good business unionism was still overreaching their bounds to the point where the ILA had to go on strike?
Yeah, well, there was two main factors here. The carriers didn't give a wage contract offer for a year and a half, and the poor carriers were starting to implement automation, violating the contract when it was still in effect. So at that point, they saw that their livelihood was at stake, and they had no choice but to strike. But they came to an agreement to go back to work before an agreement on automation came. Something doesn't make sense there. And you more you look into it, Biden mentioned he was trying to get them together. Labor Secretary was very active in these negotiations. Biden didn't want to enact Taft-Hartley because it would hurt Kamala Harris. It would help Trump. I think a backdoor agreement was made. And you look at when this contract extension expires, it's about a week and a half, 2 weeks longer than the 90-day cooling off period they would have on the Taft-Hartley, and they could go back on strike then. It almost comes off. And a friend of mine that works on the docks here in Staten Island, he's told me, he's like, it feels like it's political why we went back to work.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
Absolutely. And when you factor that in with Daggett was getting threats on his life, and the attacks from the Democratic side on claiming it was to help Trump, and not for nothing, Daggett was one of the reasons the AFL-CIO backed Biden, because if everybody remembers, in 2016, after that election, the next AFL-CIO convention, a resolution was passed to not continue business as usual with politics, not to continue to back lesser evilism. So, though the AFL-CIO fell in line like they usually do, it was slower than normal, and Daggett was the medium in which they got Biden endorsed. And he was very open about that. So these attacks on the strike as being something to help Trump were always bullshit from the start. Excuse my language. And of course, they leaned in, like mentioned, the mob connection to unions. Daggett himself in the early 2000s got off on a RICO case because the lead witness, like I said a lot in this area, ended up swimming with the fishes.
Oh my God.
Oh,
That's crazy.
he doesn't seem too bothered by these allegations, this Daggett guy.
Why would he?
Right.
Yeah. Well, and going back to the whole, Biden enacting Taft-Hartley, I mean, we remember back in 2022 when he used the Railroad Labor Act against the railroad workers. We know that if the railroads would have gone on strike, then I believe that would have caused disruption to weapons that were going to Ukraine at the time. Whereas this time now, Biden says, "Oh, dock workers, I'm not gonna interfere because I don't believe in Taft-Hartley."
He believes in the Railway Labor Act.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And now we know, of course, it's because of the weapon shipments that were able to go through, because like you said, if they would have not let those through either, he would have enacted Taft-Hartley immediately.
Right.
And
that's
then
why
they would have been forced to go back to work.
And kudos to the union for doing that at this moment. Was that part of the whole strike strategy once again? Or
I don't know if it was purposely part of the strike strategy. The ILA has a long history of doing that when they strike, going back to World War I.
to do this right before an election?
Well, that just happens to be when the contract expired. I'm talking
Yeah.
about letting the military shipments through.
Right.
And that's and let's get to that ultra left criticism of the strike. They attacked the workers for supporting genocide because they didn't block military shipments. All these social leftists think everybody has the same understanding of the world that they do. I guarantee you 90% of those workers have no idea what's going on and what it means and why.
Right.
And how do you expect workers who are working 80, 100 hours a week, especially in this area, because we can't forget about what happened in Baltimore. I know the port in Staten Island was where all their shipments went. So these guys
Are you talking about the bridge collapse?
Yeah, that port was blocked for a month. All that work came to Staten Island, all of it. So they were doing 2 ports worth of work. Do you think they had time to understand what was going on around them? They were working 24/7 basically.
Right. And even if I feel like they tried to use that as like 2 points, right? I saw it being used as a point of like, oh, well, they're letting these military shipments through. Well, I saw someone say that they were basically the left wing of fascism, by letting those weapons through, which I mean,
No, the ultra left attacking the workers are the left wing
yeah,
of fascism.
yeah.
Their attacks, who do their attacks help? Don't help workers.
Right.
Don't help the working class.
Right. It always comes back to that purity point where it's like, oh, these workers are doing something that, like,
purity and individualism.
They take that as a point to already kind of like wipe their hands of like any, I guess, really anything to do with it, which it's like, okay, that's already wrong. Right. Yeah. And it's like what you should be doing is, yes, we can recognize that. Okay, are the weapons going through the ports? They're allowing you to go through. Obviously, that's not good, but that shouldn't stop you from getting involved with the unions, these workers. I mean, why would you allow something like that to like I said, a lot of them use it as a thing to be like, oh, they're doing this bad thing. Well, I don't want to get involved with them then.
You don't attack the negative aspects from the outside.
Yeah.
You don't. All you're going to do is you're going to turn the workers against you.
Yep.
You're not going to turn. It's not going to have the effect you think it is. It rings hollow because you're not serious because you don't want to do any of the work to rectify the problem.
Right.
All right. Like I said, I walked on a picket line this week. I know Jimmy walked on a picket line this week. I talked to these workers about it. They didn't understand. They didn't have the political, understanding of what's going on, of the severity of the situation and what the effect they would have had.
They're never given the opportunity to, and they see stuff like what ultra leftists.
So,
if
you're not going to go, so you want to rectify that situation, you don't just constantly attack from the outside,
right? And
they attack there's economism because there's no political aspect to the strike. But how do you expect that to happen without getting in there and educating the workers? You can't do it. You don't talk down to them from the outside. You go in there and you work, you build the relationships with the workers, you build a rank and file movement, and that's how the workers learn, and that's how they
quoted Lenin.
Yeah.
They quoted Lenin, so
But Lenin
also said you need to get involved in reactionary unions though too.
Yeah.
So he said, there's 2 quotes that come to mind. There's the one from Lenin that says that, it's basically Lenin saying that ultra leftists like to pretend that they are working in the masses, but yet they won't interact with the masses in the trade unions, even in the reactionary trade unions. But then there's also a second quote that comes to mind. This was Dimitrov, where he's talking about, and this is going at the point where people go, oh, this is fascism. It's like, okay, well, Dimitrov says that you should get involved in fascist organizations anyways. So what is stopping you from getting involved? It's these, again, it's the purity fetish. These people don't want to get involved. They don't want to do any work. They just want to criticize from the outside, and they want to say, oh, well, you're clearly a fascist. I'm not going to get involved with you. And then they can kind of just rinse their hands, and then they can sit online more.
They just want to burn it all down.
Yep.
They don't care. They don't want solutions.
The ILA is not perfect, but what would you say as far as a progressive caucus or any sort of movements? I would say that is more class conscious. Like you said, you didn't see that on the picket line too much, but
another thing that they tried to use, ILWU Local 10, which is a local out of San Francisco where Harry Bridges came out of, put out a statement to block weapon shipments earlier this year. Now, the ILWU has a history of that. ILWU was a longshoreman on the West Coast. They broke away from the ILA in the mid to late 30s, because of the gangsterism in the ILA. But the ILA has not really taken part in any of these actions this time around. There's a reason for that. the ILWU has just gone through a massive bankruptcy case where they were forced to pay out to the ports in the Pacific Northwest because of some strike job actions they did in the past. And they just came to a settlement recently on that.
Hmm.
But on top of that, they're using the ILWU in their position to attack the ILA strike. But what did the ILWU do? They flew across the country from the West Coast to the East Coast to walk the picket lines with the ILA.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
The people you're using as justification for your attacks are doing the completely 180 opposite of what you're doing. They're out there walking those lines. They flew across the country to walk those lines. How much did that cost them? Because cross-country flights ain't cheap.
No.
Especially from a lot of these places, San Francisco, LA, Seattle to New York. Those are like the four most expensive places to fly.
I mean, I would argue, I don't know if you should do that, but I mean, they did it. That's fine. But
no, you should. Solidarity is not just a blank word. Solidarity actually means something.
Okay.
Too many people forget that. They just use the word and act like it has no meaning.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. I appreciate all that. That was quite enlightening. SM Saphone.
Yeah. Yeah. That was all really good. So with that, we'll wrap it up. And appreciate you all for coming on today for View from Left Field. Appreciate you for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.